The gavel fell like thunder in Courtroom 7B, and Mama Rose knew her life was over. Guilty of first-degree murder. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. At 67, Rose Washington sat frozen in her wooden chair, her dark hands trembling against the mahogany table. Her once proud shoulders, which had carried the weight of 3 abandoned children for a quarter-century, now sagged under the crushing reality. The silver streaks in her carefully braided hair caught the harsh courtroom lights as she closed her deep brown eyes, feeling every one of her years settling into her bones like winter cold. Behind her, the gallery erupted in whispers and gasps. But Rose heard none of it. All she could think about was the 3 babies she'd found on her doorstep 25 years ago. Marcus, barely 2 years old with scared hazel eyes. Little Sofia, just 18 months with tangled blonde curls. And baby Jamal, only 8 months old, crying so hard his tiny brown face had turned purple from hunger. What would happen to them now? The prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman in her 40s with steel-gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her pale skin, gathered her papers with the satisfaction of someone who just closed the biggest case of her career. District Attorney Patricia Hawthorne had built a reputation on putting away killers, and Rose Washington, despite her reputation as the neighborhood saint who'd taken in every stray child and fed every hungry mouth, was just another murderer to her. "Your Honor," Hawthorne announced, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade, "justice has been served for the victim, Mr. Thomas Bradley. The defendant showed no mercy when she took his life, and this sentence reflects the severity of her crime." Rose's court-appointed lawyer, a tired-looking man named Peter Chun with wire-rimmed glasses and a wrinkled suit that had seen better days, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. At 45, Peter had handled hundreds of cases, but something about Rose Washington had gotten under his skin from day one. Maybe it was the way she'd asked about her children before herself during every meeting. Maybe it was the stack of character letters, over 200 of them, from people whose lives she'd touched. "Rose," he whispered, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and defeat, "I'm so sorry. We'll file appeals, but they both knew. Life without parole meant exactly that. Asterisk what happens to a woman who gave everything to save others, only to lose everything when she needed saving most." Asterisk in the back row of the gallery, 3 figures sat in stunned silence. Marcus Rodriguez, now 27, had grown into a towering 6 feet 2 inches wall of muscle, his mixed heritage evident in his olive skin and those same hazel eyes that had once been filled with terror. As a successful construction foreman, his calloused hands now shook as he gripped the wooden pew. Beside him, Sofia Chun, she'd taken her adoptive father's surname when she'd gotten her law degree, sat rigid in her navy business suit, her blonde hair now professionally styled but her green eyes swimming with tears she refused to shed. At 26, she was the youngest partner at Morrison & Associates, but all her legal knowledge felt useless now. And Jamal Washington, 25 years old with his grandmother's same warm brown eyes and a mechanic's strong build, buried his face in his hands. The woman who'd given him her last name, who'd taught him right from wrong, who'd never missed a single basketball game or graduation, was going to die in prison. Asterisk, but what if the 3 children she'd saved had become something more powerful than anyone imagined? Asterisk, 25 years earlier, on a snowy February morning in Detroit's East Side, Rose Washington had been a different woman. At 42, she was recently widowed, working double shifts at Mercy General Hospital as a trauma nurse. Her modest 2-story house on Mack Avenue had been too quiet since her husband James died in the auto plant accident, too empty for a woman whose heart was built to love. The doorbell had rung at 5:47 a.m., just as Rose was leaving for her early shift. She'd opened the door expecting to find Mrs. Patterson from next door, maybe needing help with her arthritis medication again. Instead, she'd found a cardboard box. Asterisk, a cardboard box that would change everything. Asterisk, inside, 3 pairs of eyes had stared up at her. The note, scrawled in desperate handwriting, was simple: "Please. Their mama can't take care of them no more. They good babies. They just need love." Rose had stood there in her scrubs, her nursing bag slung over her shoulder, staring down at 3 children who'd been thrown away like garbage. Marcus, with his thumb in his mouth and a faded dinosaur shirt. Sofia, clutching a ratty stuffed rabbit. And baby Jamal, so thin his ribs showed through his onesie. I'm already late for work, she'd thought. I barely make enough money for myself. I don't know the first thing about raising kids. I should call child services. Instead, Rose Washington had done what she always did when someone needed help. She'd opened her door wider. Come on, babies, she'd whispered, lifting the box with all 3 children inside. Mama Rose is gonna take care of you now. If you've ever wondered what it truly means to open your heart when you have nothing left to give, stay with this story. Something tells me you're going to see love in ways you never imagined. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done if you'd found that box on your doorstep? But now, 25 years later, as Rose sat in shackles waiting to be transported to Michigan Women's Correctional Facility, she wondered if love had been enough. The 3 babies she'd rescued had grown into remarkable adults, but she was about to disappear from their lives forever. What she didn't know was that those 3 children had been planning something that would shake the very foundations of the justice system. The bailiff approached Rose's table, handcuffs gleaming in the fluorescent light. Time to go, ma'am. As Rose stood, her knees protesting after the long trial, she turned one last time to look at Marcus, Sofia, and Jamal. Through her tears, she mouthed the same words she'd whispered to them every night for 25 years. Mama loves you. But this wasn't goodbye. This was the beginning of the most extraordinary fight for justice anyone had ever seen. 3 months earlier, on a rain-soaked October night that would destroy everything Rose Washington had built, the emergency room at Mercy General Hospital was a war zone of blood, screams, and chaos. Rose, still working at 67 because her pension barely covered the mortgage on the house where she'd raised her 3 children, moved through the madness with the grace of someone who'd seen it all: gunshot wounds, overdoses, domestic violence victims whose eyes held secrets too terrible to speak. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in the same neat bun she'd worn for 25 years, her dark brown eyes sharp and focused despite the exhaustion that seemed to live in her bones these days. Her 5 feet 4 inches frame still sturdy and capable in royal blue scrubs that had seen better days. Trauma Bay 3. Dr. Martinez shouted over the chaos, his voice cutting through the wails of a car accident victim in Bay 1 and the angry shouting from the psychiatric hold area. Rose grabbed the crash cart, her weathered hand steady despite the adrenaline, and pushed through the swinging doors where Thomas Bradley lay convulsing on the gurney. At 34, Bradley was a mountain of a man. 6 feet 3 inches, easily 250 pounds of solid muscle, with prison tattoos covering his arms like a roadmap of violence, his shaved head gleaming with sweat, his pale blue eyes rolling back as the seizure took hold. What VE we got? Rose demanded, already checking his vitals, her trained fingers finding his pulse even as his body thrashed against the restraints. Overdose, the paramedic replied, a young woman with tired eyes who'd seen too much in her short career. Found him outside the elementary school on Gresham Avenue. Witnesses say he was talking to kids, offering them candy. Rose's blood ran cold. Gresham Elementary, where her Jamal volunteered as a basketball coach every Tuesday and Thursday. Where dozens of children she'd watched grow up from babies now learned and played and trusted the world to keep them safe. He's coming around, Dr. Martinez announced, and suddenly Thomas Bradley's eyes snapped open with the clarity of a predator who'd been playing possum. His massive hands, no longer restrained because the seizure had stopped, shot out like lightning and grabbed Rose's wrist with crushing force. I know you, he hissed, his voice a gravelly whisper that made her skin crawl. Rose Washington, the saint of the East Side. Always taking in strays, always playing mama to kids that ain't yours. Rose tried to pull away, but his grip was iron, and she could feel her bones grinding together under the pressure. Around them, the emergency room continued its chaotic dance of life and death, nurses rushing past with 4 bags, doctors barking orders, family members crying in the waiting area. But suddenly Rose felt completely alone with this monster. Let go of me, she said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced down crack addicts, gang members, and grieving mothers who blamed the world for their pain. But Bradley smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. You don't remember me, do you, Mama Rose? You should. I remember you real good. His grip tightened, and Rose felt something in her wrist pop. I was one of your strays once. Foster kid. Got placed with you for about 3 months when I was 15. Back in '04. Rose's mind raced, trying to place his face among the dozens of children who'd passed through her home over the years. So many faces, so many broken hearts she tried to heal. But this one was different. The evil in his eyes was something she'd never forget once she remembered it. Tommy Bradley, she breathed, the memory hitting her like a physical blow. The teenage boy who'd tried to hurt little Sofia when she was just 8 years old. The boy she'd caught standing over Sofia's bed in the middle of the night, his intentions written in the sick smile on his face. The boy she'd had removed from her home within hours, despite the social workers' protests that he had nowhere else to go. Now you remember, Bradley whispered, his breath hot against her face as he pulled her closer. You threw me away. Sent me back to the system. You know what happened to me after that. Rose's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. You were going to hurt my little girl. I couldn't let that happen. Your little girl? Bradley laughed, a sound like breaking glass. None of them kids were yours. Just strays you collected to make yourself feel important. Well, I got something to tell you, Mama Rose. I'm back in the neighborhood now. And I know where your precious Sofia works. I know where Marcus lives with his pretty little wife. And I especially know where baby Jamal coaches basketball every Tuesday and Thursday. The threat hit Rose like a sledgehammer to the chest. These weren't her biological children, but they were hers in every way that mattered. She'd bandaged their scraped knees, held them through nightmares, taught them to read, cheered at their graduations, walked Sofia down the aisle at her wedding just 6 months ago. They were her heart walking around outside her body, and this monster was threatening to destroy them. You stay away from my children, Rose said, her voice low and dangerous, the mama bear awakening after years of peaceful slumber. But Bradley just smiled wider. Or what? You'll call the cops? You'll have me removed again? Lady, I just got out of Jackson State Prison after doing 15 years for what you sent me back to the system to become. I got nothing to lose and all the time in the world. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear over the chaos of the emergency room. I'm gonna hurt them, Mama Rose. All 3 of them. Just like I wanted to hurt that little blonde princess all those years ago. And you're gonna watch. You're gonna know it's all your fault for throwing me away. Rose's training kicked in, the survival instincts honed by 25 years of dealing with violent patients and dangerous situations. She spotted the syringe on the crash cart, filled with morphine that had been prepared for another patient. Her free hand moved slowly, carefully, while her eyes stayed locked on Bradley's face. Please, she whispered, playing the role of the frightened old woman he expected her to be. Please don't hurt them. They're good kids. They never did anything to you. Begging now. Bradley's grip loosened slightly as his ego fed on what he thought was her fear. That's more like it. Maybe I'll make it quick for the boys. But your little Sofia, she owes me for 15 years of hell. That's when Rose struck. 25 years of emergency medicine had taught her exactly where to place the needle for maximum effect. The morphine hit Bradley's bloodstream like a freight train, and his eyes widened in shock and recognition as he realized what she'd done. You. He gasped, his massive body beginning to convulse as his system went into overdrive. Rose stepped back, watching as the man who'd threatened her children collapsed to the floor, his body seizing as the overdose took hold. Around them, the emergency room chaos continued, but Rose stood perfectly still, the empty syringe in her hand, watching the life drain out of Thomas Bradley's pale blue eyes. She felt no remorse, no regret, no fear. She felt only the cold satisfaction of a mother who'd protected her cubs. It took exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds for Thomas Bradley to die, and Rose counted every one of them. When Dr. Martinez and the other staff finally realized what had happened, When the police arrived and placed the handcuffs around Rose's wrists, when the media descended like vultures to pick apart the story of the saintly nurse who became a killer, Rose said only one thing: he threatened my children. I'd do it again. But what nobody knew, not the police, not the lawyers, not the media, was that Marcus, Sofia, and Jamal had been watching from the waiting room that night, had seen Bradley grab their mother, had heard his threats through the thin hospital walls, and had witnessed the moment their gentle, loving Mama Rose transformed into something fierce and protective and absolutely terrifying. And in that moment, as they watched the woman who'd saved them once more, the three children who'd grown into successful adults made a pact that would change everything. The old house on Mack Avenue felt like a museum of broken dreams as Marcus, Sofia, and Jamal sat around Mama Rose's kitchen table 3 days after her conviction, surrounded by 25 years of family memories that now seemed like artifacts from a life that would never return. The yellow walls still held crayon marks from when they were children: Sofia's attempt at drawing the family dog they'd never been able to afford, Marcus's height measurements penciled in doorway trim, Jamal's handprint in finger paint from kindergarten. The ancient refrigerator hummed with the same tired song it had sung for decades, its surface covered in school pictures, report cards, birthday party invitations, and graduation announcements, a paper timeline of 3 abandoned children who'd grown into extraordinary adults under the love of a woman who was now locked away for life. Marcus sat with his massive frame hunched over the table, his 6 feet 2 inches construction worker's build making the wooden chair creak with every breath, his olive-toned hands cradled around a cup of coffee that had grown cold hours ago. At 27, he'd inherited his unknown father's height and his mother's determination, but right now he looked like the scared 2-year-old who'd been left in that cardboard box, his hazel eyes red-rimmed from crying and his usually confident voice reduced to whispers. "She's never coming home," he said, the words falling like stones into the quiet kitchen. Life without parole means life without parole. I looked it up. I read every case law, every precedent. The appeals process. It could take years, and even then. He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the reality that their Mama Rose would die behind bars for protecting them. Sofia, elegant even in grief, sat perfectly straight in her chair despite the tears streaming down her cheeks, her blonde hair pulled back in the same neat bun she'd learned to make by watching Rose get ready for work every morning, her green eyes blazing with a fierce intelligence that had carried her through law school and into the youngest partnership in her firm's history. At 26, she was used to fighting impossible battles in Courtroom, but this felt different. This felt personal in a way that made her legal training seem inadequate. "There has to be something," she whispered, her voice carrying the slight tremor that only appeared when she was trying not to fall apart completely. "Some precedent, some loophole, some technicality. I've been researching self-defense cases, battered woman syndrome, defense of others." She gestured helplessly at the stacks of legal documents covering the table, pages and pages of case law and statutes that might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics for all the hope they offered. Jamal, the baby of the family and the one who'd always been Mama Rose's shadow, sat with his head in his hands, his mechanic's strong fingers tangled in his dark hair, his usual easy smile nowhere to be found. At 25, he'd grown into a gentle giant like Marcus, but where his oldest brother carried the weight of responsibility, Jamal had always been the family's heart, the one who made everyone laugh, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who still called Mama Rose every single day just to hear her voice. "I keep thinking about that night," he said, his voice muffled by his hands. "About how we sat in that waiting room like cowards while some monster threatened our mother. We should have done something. We should have protected her." His shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. "She spent 25 years protecting us, and when she needed us most, we just sat there." The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway, the same clock that had chimed every hour of their childhood, marking bedtime stories and birthday mornings and Christmas celebrations and ordinary Tuesday evenings when the 4 of them had been a family. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed Jamal's shoulder, his calloused hand gentle on his little brother's shirt. "We were in shock, man. None of us saw it coming. And besides, by the time we realized what was happening, it was already over." But Sofia was shaking her head, her legal mind working through the timeline with the precision that had made her famous in Detroit's courtrooms. No, that's not right. We did see it coming. We saw him grab her. We heard him threatening us. We watched her reach for that syringe. She looked up at her brothers, her green eyes bright with something that might have been hope or might have been desperation. We're witnesses. Eyewitnesses to Bradley's threats. We heard him say he was going to hurt us, that he'd been planning it since he got out of prison. That's not premeditation on Mama's part, that's defense of others. That's justifiable homicide. Marcus leaned forward, his construction worker's practical mind seizing on the possibility. But her lawyer said the prosecution destroyed that argument. They said she had time to think, time to choose a different option. That she could have called security, could have used the panic button, could have let that monster walk out of there to hurt her children, Jamal interrupted, his voice suddenly fierce with a protective rage that reminded them all of their mother. He lifted his head from his hands, and his brown eyes, Mama Rose's eyes, burned with determination. You know what? I don't care what the law says. I don't care about precedents or legal technicalities. That woman saved our lives 25 years ago, and she saved them again 3 months ago. She's not a murderer. She's a hero. Sofia stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the linoleum floor, her mind racing with possibilities that hadn't existed before this moment. Wait. She began pacing the small kitchen, her heels clicking against the same floor where she'd learned to walk, where Marcus had taught her to tie her shoes, where Jamal had spilled grape juice and cried until Mama Rose kissed his forehead and told him accidents were just life's way of teaching them to be more careful. What if we're looking at this all wrong? What if the problem isn't the law? What if the problem is the story? Her brothers watched as she moved, both recognizing the look on her face from their childhood. It was the same expression she'd worn when she'd figured out how to fix Marcus's broken bicycle with nothing but duct tape and determination. The same look she'd had when she'd convinced their high school principal to let Jamal graduate early so he could start working to help pay Mama Rose's medical bills when she'd had pneumonia. Sofia in problem-solving mode was a force of nature, and they'd learned long ago to just hold on and see where her brilliant mind would take them. The prosecution told a story, she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. They told the story of a vigilante nurse who took the law into her own hands. They painted Mama as a cold-blooded killer who decided to play judge, jury, and executioner. But that's not what happened. That's not our story. She stopped pacing and turned to face her brothers, her eyes bright with tears and determination in equal measure. Our story is about a woman who spent her entire life saving people, saving us, saving patients, saving every broken thing that came through her door. Our story is about a mother who saw a threat to her children and did what any mother would do. Marcus was nodding slowly, his mind working through the implications. But how do we tell that story? The trial's over. She's been convicted. The media has already moved on to the next sensational case. He gestured toward the stack of newspapers on the counter, each one featuring headlines about the angel of death and nurse killer gets life. The photos they'd used of Mama Rose were the worst possible ones. Her mugshot, where she looked tired and defeated, nothing like the warm, loving woman who'd raised them. But Jamal was sitting up straighter now, his mechanical mind starting to turn over possibilities. What if we don't go through the courts? What if we go around them? He looked at his siblings, his brown eyes bright with an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. Sofia, you know how the legal system works. Marcus, you know construction, logistics, how to build things from nothing. And I. He paused, thinking. I know people. I know the neighborhood. I know everyone Mama Rose ever helped, every life she ever touched, every person who owes their happiness to her. Asterisk, can you feel something building here? 3 children who grew up learning that love means action, that family means fighting for each other no matter what? Tell me in the comments, when someone you love is in trouble, how far would you go to save them? Because these 3 are about to show us exactly what that looks like. Asterisk. Sofia stopped pacing and stared at her youngest brother, understanding dawning in her green eyes. You're talking about something completely outside the legal system. Something that's never been tried before. Her voice was soft, but there was excitement building beneath the grief. You're talking about building a case not for the courts, but for the world. For public opinion. For justice that comes from the people instead of from judges and juries. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his hazel eyes moving from Sofia to Jamal and back again. In 25 years of being a family, they'd never undertaken anything like this, but then again, they'd never faced losing their mother before. It would take months. Maybe years. And there's no guarantee it would work. We could lose everything, our jobs, our reputations, our savings, and still not save her. The kitchen fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. It felt like the moment before a storm, when the air grows heavy with possibility and the whole world holds its breath. Outside, Detroit was waking up to another day without Rose Washington. Another day when children would walk to school past drug dealers and empty lots and broken dreams, not knowing that the woman who'd spent her life trying to save them all was locked away for saving the ones she loved most. Finally, Jamal spoke, his voice quiet but steady. She found us in a cardboard box. 3 scared, hungry, broken babies that nobody wanted. She could have called child services. She could have minded her own business. She could have chosen the easy path. He looked around the kitchen that had been the center of their world for 25 years, at the refrigerator covered in memories, at the table where they'd eaten breakfast every morning before school, at the corner where Mama Rose used to stand making their lunches and humming old gospel songs. Instead, she chose us. She chose love. She chose sacrifice. She chose to fight for 3 kids who had nothing to offer her except problems and heartache and grocery bills she couldn't afford. Sofia sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her cheeks as she reached across the table to take both her brother's hands. Her perfectly manicured fingers, which had signed contracts and written legal briefs and cross-examined witnesses, now trembled as they intertwined with Marcus's calloused construction worker's hands and Jamal's oil-stained mechanic's fingers. So we choose her. We choose to fight. We choose to tell the world who Rose Washington really is, not who the prosecutors said she was. Marcus squeezed his sibling's hands, feeling the weight of 25 years of love and gratitude settling on his shoulders like a mantle he was finally ready to wear. We choose family. We choose each other. And we choose to bring our mama home, no matter what it takes. In that moment, sitting around the same kitchen table where Rose Washington had helped them with homework and bandaged their scrapes and listened to their dreams, the 3 children she'd saved made a pact that would either save her life or destroy their own. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to embark on the most extraordinary mission of love and justice the world had ever seen. A mission that would prove that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't the law or money or influence, but simply the desperate love of children who refuse to let their mother down. The basement of the old house on Mack Avenue had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a detective's evidence room and a family shrine, with 3 adults who'd once played hide-and-seek in these same shadows now working 18-hour days trying to save the woman who'd given them everything. Card tables covered with manila folders created a maze through the cramped space, each pile representing a different piece of Thomas Bradley's twisted life story, while the walls were lined with poster boards covered in timelines, photographs, and red string connecting dots that might lead to their mother's freedom. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling cast harsh shadows across Marcus's face as he hunched over a laptop, his massive 6 feet 2 inches frame folded awkwardly into a child-sized chair they dragged down from the kitchen, his hazel eyes bloodshot from staring at computer screens for 72 hours straight. "I found something," Sofia whispered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and emotion as she held up a yellowed newspaper clipping with trembling fingers. At 26, she was used to long nights preparing for trials, but nothing had prepared her for the horror of diving deep into the mind of the monster who destroyed their family. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail instead of her usual professional bun, her business suit replaced by jeans and one of Marcus's old flannel shirts, her green eyes wide with a kind of discovery that changes everything. "Look at this." Detroit Free Press, July 15, 2009. Local teen sentenced for sexual assault of minor. She spread the article on the table between her brothers, her hand shaking as she pointed to the grainy black and white photo of a younger Thomas Bradley being led away in handcuffs. That's him. That's definitely him. And look at the victim's age. Jamal leaned closer, his brown eyes, so much like Mama Rose's, scanning the article with growing horror and hope in equal measure. At 25, he'd always been the family optimist, the one who saw the good in everyone, but 3 days of researching Thomas Bradley's criminal history had shown him depths of evil he'd never imagined existed. 8 years old, he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. The victim was 8 years old. Sofia. He looked up at his sister, understanding dawning in his eyes. Sofia, how old were you when Bradley was placed with us? When Mama Rose had him removed? Sofia's face went white as the memory came flooding back. Not the vague childhood recollection she'd carried for years, but the sharp, terrifying clarity of trauma suddenly understood. I was 8, she breathed. I was 8 years old, and he, oh God, Marcus, he was going to. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice what they all now understood. Thomas Bradley hadn't been a troubled teenager acting out. He'd been a predator who'd targeted her specifically, who'd seen an opportunity in Rose Washington's loving home and tried to take advantage of an innocent little girl. Marcus stood up so fast his chair toppled backward, his construction worker's hands clenched into fists as 23 years of buried rage came roaring to the surface. That son of a... He caught himself, remembering Mama Rose's rule about language in the house, even though she wasn't there to enforce it anymore. Sofia, baby sister, I'm so sorry. We should have protected you. I should have known something was wrong. But Sofia was shaking her head, tears streaming down her cheeks as she pulled both her brothers into a fierce hug. You were 4 years old, Marcus. You were barely more than a baby yourself. And Mama Rose did protect me. She saw what he was, and she got him out of our house before he could hurt me. Her voice grew stronger as the implications sank in. Don't you see what this means? This proves that Bradley was a serial predator. This proves that Mama Rose wasn't some vigilante killer. She was a mother protecting her child from a known sex offender. Jamal was already moving toward another stack of papers, his mechanical mind working through possibilities with the same precision he used to diagnose engine problems. If he assaulted one 8-year-old girl, there might be others. There might be a pattern. Sofia, can you use your legal connections to access court records? Sealed juvenile files, victim statements, psychiatric evaluations. He turned to Marcus, his eyes bright with a kind of hope that had been missing from their lives since the conviction. And Marcus, you know construction workers all over the city, right? Guys who work near schools, near playgrounds, near places where Bradley might have been seen hanging around kids. Marcus nodded, his protective instincts kicking into high gear as he began to pace the small basement. I know foremen on job sites all over Detroit. Guys who've been working the same neighborhoods for decades. If Bradley was stalking kids near schools, somebody would have noticed. Construction workers see everything. We're invisible to most people, but we're always watching. He pulled out his phone, already scrolling through contacts. I'll start with the sites near Gresham Elementary, where the cops found him that night. Then I'll work outward, hitting every school in a 5-mile radius. Sofia was back at her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with renewed purpose as she accessed legal databases and court record systems with a kind of focused intensity that had made her the youngest partner in her firm's history. I'm pulling everything I can find on Bradley's criminal history, but I need more than newspaper articles. I need victim statements, police reports, psychological evaluations, parole officer notes. She paused, looking up at her brothers with an expression that was part grief, part determination, part desperate love. This is going to be ugly, guys. Really, really ugly. We're going to have to relive the worst moments of people's lives, dig through pain and trauma and horror that most people spend their whole lives trying to forget. The basement fell quiet except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of Detroit waking up outside. Car engines starting, school buses rumbling down Mack Avenue, the everyday rhythm of a city that didn't know it was about to witness the most extraordinary fight for justice in its history. In the silence, each of them was remembering the same moment from 23 years ago, the morning they'd woken up to find Mama Rose packing a suitcase for the teenage boy who'd been living with them for 3 months, her face grim and determined in a way they'd never seen before. "He has to go," she'd said when Marcus had asked why Tommy was leaving so suddenly. "Sometimes people come into our lives who aren't safe to be around. It's my job to keep you babies protected, even when it's hard." She'd knelt down to Sofia's eye level, her dark hands gentle on the little girl's blonde curls. "Baby girl, if anyone ever makes you feel scared or uncomfortable, you tell Mama Rose right away, okay? It doesn't matter who they are or what they say, your safety is more important than anyone's feelings." At the time, they'd thought she was being overprotective, maybe even unfair to Tommy who'd seemed nice enough during his short stay. Now they understood that their mother had seen evil masquerading as vulnerability and had chosen to act, even knowing it would mean one less foster care payment and one more black mark on her record with child services. Isn't it incredible how a mother's instinct to protect her children can see danger that everyone else misses? Share in the comments. Have you ever had someone in your life who saw red flags before you did? Because what these three are about to uncover will show you just how right Mama Rose was. Jamal was the first to break the silence, his voice soft but steady as he looked around the basement that had become their war room. "You know what the most amazing part is? She never told us. 23 years, and she never once said, 'I told you so,' or made us feel bad for not understanding why Tommy had to go. She just protected us and moved on, the way she always did." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of ink from the papers he'd been handling. "That's who she is. That's who we're fighting for. Not just our mama, but the woman who's spent her whole life putting other people's safety before her own comfort." Sofia looked up from her laptop screen, where she'd been reading a victim impact statement that made her stomach turn with rage and grief. "I found 3 more cases. 3 more little girls between the ages of 7 and 9 who were assaulted by Thomas Bradley over the past 15 years. 3 more families destroyed by that monster." Her voice was getting stronger, more determined with each word. "But here's the thing that's going to save Mama Rose. Every single one of these victims' families wrote letters to the parole board begging them not to release Bradley early. They all said he was too dangerous to be around children. They all said he would re-offend." Marcus stopped pacing and turned to stare at his sister, understanding dawning in his hazel eyes. The state knew. The parole board knew he was a threat to children, and they released him anyway. They put him back on the streets knowing he would hurt more kids. Not just knowing, Sofia said, her legal mind working through the implications with growing excitement. Ignoring. Actively ignoring the warnings from victims, from therapists, from his own probation officers. There's a whole paper trail of people saying Thomas Bradley should never be around children again. She turned her laptop around so her brothers could see the screen filled with official documents, parole reports, and psychological evaluations. This isn't just about Mama Rose anymore. This is about a system that failed to protect children and then punished the one person who actually did her job. Jamal was nodding, his brown eyes bright with the kind of righteous anger that their mother had taught them to channel into positive action. "So we don't just prove that Mama Rose acted in self-defense and defense of others. We prove that she was the only one who did what the system was supposed to do, keep a dangerous predator away from innocent children." The 3 siblings looked at each other across the table covered with evidence of Thomas Bradley's crimes, and for the first time since their mother's conviction, they felt something stronger than grief and desperation. They felt hope. Not just hope that they might be able to save Rose Washington, but hope that they might be able to prevent other families from going through the same nightmare, other children from becoming victims of a system that cared more about bureaucracy than safety. Marcus reached across the table and took Sofia's hand, his calloused fingers gentle on her perfectly manicured ones. "We're really doing this, aren't we? We're going to take on the entire justice system for one 67-year-old woman who picked 3 babies up off her doorstep 25 years ago. Sofia squeezed her brother's hand and reached for Jamal's with her free one, completing the circle that had sustained them through childhood and would sustain them through this fight. We're going to do more than that. We're going to show the world what real justice looks like. We're going to prove that sometimes the most important laws aren't written in books, they're written in a mother's heart. In that basement, surrounded by evidence of evil but bound together by love, 3 abandoned children who'd grown into extraordinary adults made a promise that would shake the foundations of the legal system and prove that sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't money or influence or political connections. It's simply the desperate, determined love of children who refuse to let their mother down. 2 weeks into their investigation, at 2:47 a.m. on a bitter November night when the old house on Mack Avenue creaked with the weight of 25 years of memories and 3 adults who hadn't slept properly since their mother's conviction, Sofia's phone rang with a sharp, urgent tone she'd assigned to emergency contacts, jolting all 3 siblings from their exhausted stupor as they huddled around laptops and legal documents in the basement that had become their second home. And when she saw the name Detective Rivera retired flashing on the screen, her heart nearly stopped because Tony Rivera had been the one cop in Detroit who'd believed there was more to Rose Washington's story than the prosecution had presented. A 30-year veteran of the force whose own daughter had been saved by Mama Rose when she'd overdosed at 16 and ended up in the emergency room where Rose had not only provided medical care but had stayed after her shift ended to hold the girl's hand and pray with a father who was falling apart. "Sofia, I need you and your brothers to meet me at Mercy General right now." Rivera's gravelly voice carried the urgency of someone who just discovered something that could change everything, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an excitement that made Sofia's pulse race as she gestured frantically for Marcus and Jamal to come closer to the phone. "I've been working my contacts in hospital security, calling in favors from guys I've known for decades, and I finally got someone to dig deeper into the surveillance footage from that night. Not just the emergency room cameras that the prosecution used, but the parking garage cameras, the staff entrance cameras, the cameras that monitor the medication storage areas." Sofia's hands were shaking as she put the phone on speaker, her green eyes wide with hope and terror in equal measure, because she knew that whatever Rivera had found could either save their mother or destroy their last chance at bringing her home. "What did you find, Detective?" Marcus asked, his construction worker's practical mind already working through logistics, how long it would take them to get to the hospital, what questions they should ask, what this might mean for their case, while his heart hammered against his ribs with a kind of anticipation that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff not knowing whether you were about to fly or fall. "I found Thomas Bradley on camera 47 minutes before he showed up in the emergency room," Rivera said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent 30 years uncovering truths that people wanted to keep buried. "And he wasn't alone, and he wasn't acting like someone who was having a drug overdose. And what I saw is going to make you sick to your stomachs, but it's also going to prove that your mother didn't commit murder." She stopped one. Jamal was already grabbing his jacket, his brown eyes, so much like Mama Rose's, burning with a kind of protective fury that had been building in all 3 of them for weeks as they'd uncovered layer after layer of Thomas Bradley's depravity, discovering that the monster who'd threatened their family had been walking free for months while the system that was supposed to protect children had looked the other way. "We're on our way," Sofia said, her legal training kicking in as she began mentally preparing for whatever evidence Rivera had uncovered. But nothing could have prepared her for what they were about to see. Nothing could have prepared any of them for the revelation that would turn their understanding of that horrible night completely upside down and prove that Rose Washington hadn't just acted in self-defense. She'd prevented a tragedy that would have destroyed more lives than they could have imagined. The drive to Mercy General took 23 minutes through empty Detroit streets that looked like a war zone in the harsh glare of sodium streetlights, past boarded-up houses and empty lots where families used to live before the city's economy collapsed and took so many dreams down with it, past the elementary school where Jamal still volunteered as a basketball coach and where they now knew Thomas Bradley had been stalking children just hours before his death, past the bus stop where Marcus had waited every morning for 12 years while Mama Rose worked double shifts to keep food on their table and dreams alive in their hearts. Rivera was waiting for them in a hospital security office, a small windowless room on the 3rd floor that smelled like stale coffee and electronic equipment, where banks of monitors showed real-time feeds from dozens of cameras throughout the massive medical complex. And when they walked in, the detective's weathered face looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 24 hours. His usually neat gray hair disheveled and his brown eyes haunted by whatever he'd discovered in those digital files. "Before I show you this, I need you to understand something," Rivera said, his voice heavy with the weight of 30 years of investigating the worst things human beings could do to each other. "What you're about to see is going to change how you think about that night, about your mother's actions, about everything the prosecution told the jury. But it's also going to show you things about Thomas Bradley that will give you nightmares for the rest of your lives." He gestured toward 3 chairs arranged in front of a large monitor, his movements careful and deliberate like someone handling explosives. "The footage I'm about to show you is never presented at trial because the prosecution said it wasn't relevant to what happened in the emergency room, but they were wrong. It's the most relevant thing in the world because it shows Bradley's state of mind, his intentions, his level of premeditation, and most importantly, it shows that your mother wasn't the first person he threatened that night." Sofia felt her stomach drop as she realized what Rivera was implying, her legal mind racing through the implications while her heart shattered at the thought of what other families might have suffered because a monster had been walking free through their neighborhood. "Show us," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest, his construction worker's hands clenched into fists as he prepared to see visual proof of the evil that had threatened his family and cost his mother her freedom. Rivera clicked a few keys, and suddenly the monitor filled with grainy black and white footage from a hospital parking garage, timestamp showing 9:15 p.m. on the night that had destroyed their lives, and there was Thomas Bradley's massive frame moving through the shadows between cars with the predatory grace of someone who knew exactly what he was hunting. But he wasn't alone. There was a small figure with him. A child who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, a little girl with long dark hair who was clearly terrified, her body language screaming fear and confusion as Bradley's meaty hand gripped her shoulder and steered her toward the hospital entrance. "Oh God," Sofia whispered, her hand flying to her mouth as the horrible truth began to sink in. "He brought a victim with him. He was planning to." "Keep watching," Rivera said grimly, fast-forwarding through several minutes of footage until they reached 9:52 p.m., where they could see Bradley and the little girl entering through the staff entrance that hospital employees used for quick access during emergencies. The same entrance where Rose Washington parked every day after 25 years of saving lives in the trauma unit. The timestamp jumped to 10:03 p.m., and suddenly they were watching Bradley drag the terrified child through corridors they all recognized, past the cafeteria where they'd eaten countless meals while waiting for Mama Rose to finish her shifts, past the chapel where she'd taken them to pray when Marcus had broken his arm and needed surgery, toward the elevator that led to the pediatric ward where sick children trusted adults to keep them safe. "He was using the hospital as a hunting ground," Jamal said, his voice barely above a whisper as the full scope of Bradley's plan became clear. "He was going to hurt that little girl right there in the hospital, in the place where Mama worked, where she'd spent her whole career saving children." Rivera nodded, his expression grim as he advanced the footage to 10:21 p.m., showing Bradley and his victim emerging from the elevator on the 4th floor, the pediatric wing that was nearly deserted at that time of night except for a skeleton crew of nurses and doctors who were focused on the few critical patients in intensive care. "But here's where it gets interesting," Rivera said, pausing the footage on a frame that showed Bradley looking directly into one of the security cameras, his pale blue eyes cold and calculating, no trace of the drug-induced confusion that would later characterize his appearance in the emergency room. "This man is stone-cold sober, completely in control of his faculties, executing a plan he's clearly thought through in advance, which means everything he told your mother about being high, about not knowing what he was doing, about the threats being just drug-fueled rambling, was a complete lie." The next sequence of footage was almost too horrific to watch, showing Bradley dragging the sobbing child into an empty patient room on the pediatric ward, the timestamp reading 10:33 p.m., just 12 minutes before he would appear in the emergency room claiming to be having a drug overdose, and the sound of the little girl's terrified cries echoed through the security office like daggers to their hearts. "That's when your mother saw them," Rivera said, advancing to 10:39 p.m. where Rose Washington appeared on the pediatric ward cameras, having just finished her shift in the trauma unit but staying late to check on a patient, her face changing from tired concern to absolute horror as she realized what was happening in that patient room. her entire body language transforming from exhausted nurse to protective mother in the span of a heartbeat. The footage showed Rose confronting Bradley in the hallway outside the patient room, the little girl clinging to her scrubs as she positioned herself between the child and the monster who'd been about to destroy her innocence. And even without audio, they could see the heated exchange, could see Bradley's rage at being interrupted, could see Rose's fierce determination to protect an innocent child even though she was facing a man twice her size who had nothing left to lose. She saved that little girl, Sofia breathed, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her mother's heroic actions play out on the security monitor. She saved her, and then Bradley threatened us to get revenge, to make her pay for ruining his plan. Rivera paused the footage and turned to face the three siblings, his weathered face etched with the kind of righteous anger that had driven him to keep investigating long after his official retirement. Your mother didn't commit murder that night, she prevented one, and then she prevented three more when Bradley threatened to hurt all of you in retaliation, and the prosecution knew this footage existed, knew what it showed, and chose not to present it because it would have destroyed their narrative of Rose Washington as a cold-blooded killer. In that sterile security office, surrounded by the electronic eyes that had captured the truth about their mother's heroic actions, Marcus, Sofia, and Jamal finally understood that they weren't just fighting to free an innocent woman. They were fighting to honor a hero whose sacrifice had saved lives and whose courage had cost her everything. The address Detective Rivera had given them led to a modest two-story house in Highland Park, where the morning sun cast long shadows across a neighborhood that had seen better days but still held the stubborn hope of families who refused to give up on their piece of the American dream. And as Marcus parked his pickup truck across the street from a yellow house with white shutters and a small front porch decorated with wind chimes that sang soft melodies in the November breeze, Sofia felt her heart hammering against her ribs with a kind of nervous anticipation that comes from knowing you're about to meet someone whose life intersected with yours in the most extraordinary and tragic way possible. The little girl from the security footage, whose name they'd learned was Isabella Rodriguez, now 11 years old and in the 5th grade at the same elementary school where Jamal volunteered as a basketball coach, lived here with her grandmother, Maria Rodriguez, a 58-year-old woman whose weathered hands and kind brown eyes spoke of a lifetime spent raising children and grandchildren with more love than money, and whose voice had trembled with emotion when Sofia had called the night before to explain who they were and why they needed to speak with Isabella about the night that had changed all their lives forever. She still has nightmares, Maria had whispered into the phone, her slight Mexican accent coloring words heavy with pain and gratitude in equal measure. About the bad man who took her from the playground, who told her he was going to show her something special, who dragged her through those hospital halls like she was nothing more than a toy for his sick games. Maria's voice had grown stronger, more determined. But she also dreams about the angel nurse who saved her, who wrapped her in a warm blanket and held her until the police came, who promised her that the bad man would never hurt her again. And Mija, when I saw on the news that they put that beautiful woman in prison for protecting my granddaughter, I wanted to march down to that courthouse and tell them they were destroying the wrong person's life. Now, as the three siblings walked up the cracked concrete path toward the front door, past a small garden where Maria had planted marigolds and roses that bloomed defiantly despite the urban decay surrounding them, Jamal couldn't help but think about all the children his mother had touched over the years, not just the three she'd raised as her own, but the countless kids who'd passed through her emergency room, the foster children who'd stayed for days or weeks or months, the neighborhood kids who'd shown up at their door hungry or scared or just needing someone to listen to their problems. What if this is too much for her? He asked, his brown eyes filled with the same protective instinct that had driven Rose Washington to risk everything for a child she'd never met before. What if talking about that night makes it worse for her? But before Marcus or Sofia could answer, the front door opened and a small figure appeared behind the screen. A girl with long dark hair pulled back in two neat braids, wearing a purple school dress and black shoes that looked like they'd been polished with the kind of care that comes from a grandmother who believes that looking your best is the first step toward feeling your best. And when Isabella Rodriguez looked up at them with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young, Sofia felt something in her chest crack open with the force of recognition. This was the child their mother had saved. This was the reason Rose Washington was sitting in a prison cell instead of making Sunday dinner in her kitchen on Mack Avenue. Abuela, Isabella called over her shoulder in a voice that was stronger and more confident than any of them had expected. The people are here to talk about the angel nurse. She pushed open the screen door and stepped onto the porch, her dark eyes studying each of their faces with the intensity of someone who'd learned early that adults weren't always safe, that sometimes the people who smiled the biggest had the darkest intentions. "You look like her," she said suddenly, pointing at Marcus with a small finger. "You have the same kind eyes." The nurse, she had kind eyes too, even when she was scared. Maria appeared behind her granddaughter, wiping her hands on a dish towel and offering the warm, welcoming smile that had probably comforted Isabella through countless nightmares and difficult days since that horrible October night. "Please come in, come in. Isabella has been asking to meet you ever since I told her who you were, who raised you." She gestured toward a living room that was small but immaculately clean, decorated with family photos and religious candles, and the kind of handmade crafts that spoke of a home where love mattered more than money. "She wants to tell you about your mama, about what she did that night." As they settled into the modest living room, Marcus folding his large frame into a chair that seemed too delicate for his construction worker's build, Sofia perching on the edge of the sofa with her legal pad ready to take notes, Jamal cross-legged on the floor so he could be at Isabella's eye level. The little girl climbed into her grandmother's lap and began to speak in a voice that was clear and steady despite the weight of the story she was carrying. "The bad man told me he was a doctor," Isabella began, her small hands fidgeting with the hem of her dress as she remembered details that no child should ever have to carry. "He was at the playground near my school, and he said there was a sick puppy at the hospital that needed someone to pet it so it would feel better. I know I'm not supposed to go with strangers, but he seemed so sad about the puppy, and he showed me a badge that looked real." Her voice wavered slightly, and Maria's arms tightened around her protectively. "But when we got to the hospital, there was no puppy, and he started saying things that scared me, bad things about what he wanted to do, and his hands." She shuddered, unable to finish the sentence, but they all understood. Sofia felt tears burning behind her eyes as she realized how close this beautiful, innocent child had come to suffering unimaginable trauma. How many other children might have been victims if Rose Washington hadn't been in the right place at the right time with the courage to act. "But then the angel nurse found you," she said softly, encouraging Isabella to continue while trying to keep her own emotions in check. Isabella's face lit up with a kind of pure joy that only children can express, her dark eyes sparkling as she remembered the moment her nightmare had turned into salvation. She was so beautiful, like a real angel with silver hair and the softest voice, and she saw me crying in that scary room and she got so mad at the bad man, but not at me, never at me. The little girl's voice grew stronger, more animated as she relived the rescue that had saved her childhood. "She pushed him away from me and wrapped me in a blanket that smelled like flowers, and she told me I was safe now, that no one was ever going to hurt me again, and she meant it. I could tell she meant it because her eyes were fierce like a mama lion protecting her babies." Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his hazel eyes intense as he absorbed every detail of Isabella's story, understanding for the first time the full scope of what his mother had prevented that night. "What happened next, sweetheart? After she wrapped you in the blanket?" "She called the other nurses and the security guards, and she held my hand while they came running, and she sang to me, a song about being brave and strong and loved, and even though I was still scared, I wasn't scared anymore because I knew she wouldn't let anything bad happen to me." Isabella's smile faded slightly as she remembered the rest. "But then the bad man came back and he was so angry, and he grabbed the angel nurse's arm really hard, and he said terrible things about hurting other children, and her face changed, like she was a different person, like she was ready to fight a monster." Jamal's hands clenched into fists as he imagined Thomas Bradley putting his hands on their mother, threatening more innocent children while Isabella watched in terror. "Did you hear what he said? The exact words." Isabella nodded solemnly, her young mind having recorded every terrifying detail with the perfect clarity that trauma can bring. "He said he knew where the angel nurse's children went to school, and he knew where they lived, and he was going to hurt them the same way he wanted to hurt me, only worse, because she had stopped him from having his fun." The little girl's voice dropped to a whisper. "And then the angel nurse looked at me, and she looked at the bad man, and I saw her make a decision, the same way Abuela makes decisions when someone tries to hurt our family." Sofia was writing furiously, her legal training helping her recognize the crucial testimony they were hearing, Testimony that proved Rose Washington had acted not out of vigilante justice, but out of the desperate need to protect multiple children from a serial predator. Isabella, this is very important. Did the bad man seem sick? Did he seem like someone who was confused or didn't know what he was doing? The little girl shook her head emphatically, her dark braids swaying with emotion. No, no, no. He was mean smart, planning smart. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he liked it. He liked scaring me. He liked making me cry. And when the angel nurse stopped him, he got mad like a little boy who has his toy taken away, except his toy was. She trailed off, but they all understood what she couldn't say. Maria spoke for the first time since they'd sat down, her voice heavy with the weight of a grandmother's love and fury. Isabella had therapy for months after that night, and the doctor said she was one of the luckiest children he'd ever treated, because most children who encounter predators like Bradley don't have someone step in to save them in time. Her brown eyes flashed with protective fire. Your mother didn't just save my granddaughter's body, she saved her soul, her ability to trust, her faith that good people exist in the world. But Isabella was already reaching into the pocket of her school dress, pulling out something small and carefully wrapped in tissue paper. I have something for you, she said, her voice shy but determined as she unwrapped what turned out to be a small silver charm bracelet, the kind of inexpensive jewelry that means everything to a little girl who is very little. The angel nurse gave this to me that night, after the police came and took the bad man away. She said it belonged to her daughter once, and she wanted me to have it so I would remember that I was brave and strong and worthy of being protected. Sofia's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the bracelet. It had been hers when she was 8 years old, a Christmas gift from Mama Rose that she'd treasured until she'd outgrown it and forgotten about it in the way that children forget about childhood treasures. But Rose had kept it, had carried it with her all these years, and in the moment when a terrified little girl needed something tangible to hold on to, something real to prove that she was valued and loved, their mother had given away one of her most precious memories. She really is an angel, Isabella said simply, pressing the bracelet into Sofia's hands with the solemnity of someone passing on a sacred trust. And angels don't belong in cages. Angels belong in the world, saving people like me. In that modest living room, surrounded by the love of a grandmother who understood sacrifice and the courage of a little girl who'd looked evil in the face and lived to tell about it, Marcus, Sofia, and Jamal finally understood that their fight wasn't just about saving their mother. It was about honoring a hero whose actions had ripple effects they were only beginning to comprehend, and whose sacrifice had proven that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in courtrooms or boardrooms, but in hospital hallways at 10 o'clock at night when innocent children need someone to stand between them and the monsters who would steal their light. The anonymous letter arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after their meeting with Isabella, slipped under the front door of the house on Mack Avenue like a serpent sliding through their defenses, and when Sofia found it while she was rushing out to meet with a private investigator who'd agreed to help them track down more of Bradley's victims, her hands trembled as she read the words that would either destroy their mission or reveal the depth of corruption they were truly fighting against. "Stop digging or your family will join your mother in a cage," typed in bold black letters on plain white paper that could have come from anywhere, signed only with a crude drawing of a broken heart that made Sofia's blood run cold because she recognized the symbol from somewhere in her past, some half-remembered nightmare that her subconscious was trying to protect her from remembering. She called Marcus immediately, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat, and by the time he arrived with Jamal, both of them looking like they hadn't slept in days, which was true, since they'd been working 18-hour days interviewing witnesses, gathering evidence, and building a case that was growing stronger by the hour. The three siblings were huddled around the kitchen table that had been the center of their world for 25 years, trying to figure out who would want them to stop fighting for their mother and why they would resort to anonymous threats instead of legal challenges. "Someone's scared," Marcus said, his construction worker's practical mind analyzing the situation like a structural problem that needed solving, his hazel eyes hard with a kind of anger that had been building since Rose's conviction. "Someone with power, someone with connections, someone who knows that what we're uncovering could bring down more than just a wrongful conviction." Jamal was pacing the small kitchen, his brown eyes, so much like Mama Rose's, burning with protective fury as he thought about all the people who'd been involved in their mother's case, from the prosecutor who'd painted her as a cold-blooded killer to the judge who'd allowed crucial evidence to be suppressed to the prison officials who were keeping her locked away like she was some kind of monster instead of the hero she really was. But before any of them could voice their suspicions, Sofia's phone rang with a call that would shatter their understanding of everything they thought they knew about their mother's case, everything they believed about justice and corruption, and the price of fighting for truth in a world where powerful people had too much to lose. Sofia Chen? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed, a woman's voice with the crisp pronunciation of expensive education and the cold edge of someone who'd never had to worry about where her next meal was coming from. "This is District Attorney Patricia Hawthorne. I believe we need to talk." The same Patricia Hawthorne who'd prosecuted their mother, who'd stood in that courtroom and painted Rose Washington as a vigilante killer, who'd suppressed evidence and manipulated testimony to secure a conviction that had destroyed their family, was now calling Sofia directly, and the implications made Sofia's head spin with possibilities both hopeful and terrifying. "I have information about your mother's case that you need to hear, but not over the phone, and not in any official capacity," Hawthorne continued, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been regret or might have been fear. "Meet me at Belle Isle Park, near the aquarium, in 1 hour. Come alone, and don't tell anyone about this conversation. Not your brothers, not your private investigators, not anyone, because there are people watching this situation who won't hesitate to destroy all of us if they think we're collaborating." The line went dead, leaving Sofia staring at her phone while Marcus and Jamal watched her face go white with shock and confusion. "That was the prosecutor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she tried to process what had just happened. "Patricia Hawthorne wants to meet with me. Alone. She says she has information about Mama's case." Marcus stood up so fast his chair scraped against the linoleum floor, his protective instincts flaring to life as he imagined his little sister walking into what could be a trap set by the woman who'd already destroyed their family once. "Absolutely not. No way in hell are you meeting that woman alone. This could be anything, a setup, a trick, a way to gather information about what we've discovered so they can shut us down permanently." But Sofia was already grabbing her jacket, her legal mind working through the possibilities with a kind of focused intensity that had made her the youngest partner in her firm's history. "Don't you see? She called me directly, not through official channels. She wants to meet secretly, away from the courthouse, away from her office. That means one of two things. Either she's trying to trap us, or she's trying to help us, and either way, I need to know which one it is." Jamal stepped between his sister and the door, his brown eyes pleading as he thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways they could lose Sofia the same way they'd lost their mother. "Sofia, baby sister, please think about this rationally. What if this is connected to the anonymous threat? What if someone told Hawthorne to lure you out so they could?" But Sofia was shaking her head, her blonde hair catching the morning light streaming through the kitchen window as she made a decision that would either save their mother or destroy them all. "I have to go. Whatever Hawthorne knows, whatever she's willing to tell me, it could be the key to everything we've been fighting for." She looked at her brothers with eyes that held 25 years of love and trust and shared determination. "But you're right about one thing, I'm not going in completely blind." She pulled out her phone and quickly activated the recording app, then tucked it into her jacket pocket, where it would be hidden but still able to capture whatever conversation was about to unfold. "If something happens to me, if this is a trap, at least you'll have evidence of who was involved." An hour later, Sofia stood near the Belle Isle Aquarium, the Detroit River stretching endlessly before her like a metaphor for all the unknown dangers that lay ahead, while families with children walked past enjoying the kind of peaceful Tuesday afternoon that she and her brothers hadn't experienced since their mother's arrest. And when Patricia Hawthorne emerged from behind the aquarium building, the prosecutor looked nothing like the confident, ruthless woman who destroyed Rose Washington. In court, instead, she looked tired and scared and older than her 50-something years, her usually perfect gray hair disheveled and her expensive suit wrinkled like she'd been wearing it for days without sleep. "Thank you for coming," Hawthorne said, her voice lacking the prosecutorial authority that had once made judges and juries hang on her every word. "I wasn't sure you would, given everything that's happened between our families." Sofia kept her distance, Every instinct she'd learned from 25 years of being Rose Washington's daughter, telling her to be cautious, to be smart, to protect herself and her brothers and the mission that had become their entire reason for living. You destroyed my mother's life. You sent a hero to prison for protecting children. What could you possibly have to tell me that would matter now? But Hawthorne's response shattered everything Sofia thought she knew about the case, about the conviction, about the entire system of justice that had failed their family so completely. I never wanted to prosecute your mother, the district attorney said, her voice breaking with emotion that seemed genuine and desperate and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Rose Washington is everything you think she is, a hero, a saint, a woman who spent her life saving others. And I knew it from the moment I read the case file, from the moment I saw the security footage that my office chose not to present, from the moment I interviewed the witnesses who were never called to testify. Sofia felt the world tilting beneath her feet as the full scope of what she was hearing began to sink in. Then why? Why did you prosecute her? Why did you paint her as a monster when you knew she was innocent? Hawthorne looked out over the Detroit River, her eyes distant as if she was seeing ghosts of all the cases she prosecuted, all the lives she destroyed in service of a system that cared more about conviction rates than actual justice. Because I was threatened. Because my own family was threatened. Because there are people in this city, people with power and money and connections, who had reasons to want Thomas Bradley dead that had nothing to do with his crimes against children. The prosecutor turned to face Sofia, and in her eyes was a desperation that matched Sofia's own, the look of someone who'd been carrying an unbearable secret for too long. Bradley wasn't just a child predator, he was a blackmailer, and he had information about some very important people, information that could have destroyed careers and families and political empires, and when he died in that hospital, certain people breathed easier, and they made it very clear that anyone who dug too deeply into the real circumstances of his death would face consequences that would make your mother's life sentence look like a vacation. Sofia's recording device was capturing every word, every admission, every revelation that was rewriting their understanding of why Rose Washington was really in prison, but as the truth unfolded, she realized that their fight was bigger than they'd ever imagined, more dangerous than they'd ever feared. And the people they were up against had resources and ruthlessness that made their small family's determination seem almost laughably inadequate. Who? Sofia asked, her voice steady despite the terror growing in her chest. Who threatened? You? Who wanted Bradley dead badly enough to let an innocent woman rot in prison? But before Hawthorne could answer, the sound of footsteps on the gravel path behind them made both women turn, and Sofia's heart stopped as she saw three men in expensive suits walking toward them with a kind of purposeful stride that meant business of the deadly variety, their faces cold and professional and utterly without mercy. And Patricia Hawthorne grabbed Sofia's arm with trembling fingers as she whispered the words that would haunt them both, "Run." Sofia ran through Belle Isle Park like her life depended on it, which, given the three men in expensive suits who were pursuing her with the methodical determination of professional hunters, it absolutely did, her legal training having never prepared her for the kind of terror that comes from being chased by people who clearly had no intention of taking her to court, and as she ducked behind the Maritime Museum, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom, she fumbled for her phone with trembling fingers while Patricia Hawthorne's final words echoed in her mind like a death sentence. They'll kill us both if they catch us, and they'll make it look like an accident, just like they've done to others who got too close to the truth. The recording device in her jacket pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, heavy with the confessions that could either save Rose Washington or get Sofia and her brothers murdered by whoever had enough power to force a district attorney to prosecute an innocent woman. And as she crouched in the shadow of the museum's brick walls, listening to the sound of expensive shoes on gravel getting closer with each passing second, Sofia made a decision that would either be the bravest or stupidest thing she'd ever done in her 26 years of life. She called Marcus, not caring that Hawthorne had warned her not to involve her brothers, not caring that she might be putting them in danger, because family meant everything to the Washington children, and if she was going to die for trying to save their mother, she wanted to die knowing that Marcus and Jamal would continue the fight with evidence that could finally set Rose free. "Sofia? Where are you? You sound..." Marcus's concerned voice was cut off as Sofia whispered urgently into the phone, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush to get the information out before her pursuers found her hiding place. "Marcus, listen to me very carefully, and don't interrupt, because I might not have much time," she said, her legal training helping her organize her thoughts even as panic threatened to overwhelm her completely. "I'm at Belle Isle and I'm in trouble, but that's not important right now. What's important is that I have a recording of District Attorney Patricia Hawthorne admitting that she knew Mama was innocent, that she was forced to prosecute the case by people who wanted Thomas Bradley dead for reasons that had nothing to do with child abuse." Sofia paused to peek around the corner of the building, seeing two of the men in suits spreading out to search the area while the third one spoke into what looked like a radio or phone, clearly coordinating with others who might be arriving soon. Hawthorne said Bradley was blackmailing important people, politicians or businessmen or whoever, and when he died, they made sure that anyone who asked too many questions would face consequences, which is why they let Mama take the fall for murder instead of investigating what really happened that night. Marcus was already moving. She could hear it in his voice, the sound of car keys and doors slamming and the engine of his pickup truck roaring to life as he prepared to come rescue his little sister the same way he'd been protecting her since they were children in Rose Washington's house. "I'm coming to get you, Sofia. Stay hidden, stay safe, and keep talking to me so I know you're alive," he said, his construction worker's calm efficiency taking over as he shifted into crisis mode. "Jamal's with me and we're calling Detective Rivera, and we're going to get you out of there before anyone can hurt you." But Sofia was shaking her head even though he couldn't see her, her mind working through the implications with a kind of strategic thinking that had made her such a formidable lawyer. "No, Marcus, that's exactly what they want. They want us panicked, they want us making mistakes, they want us to run to the police with half a story and no proof, because then they can discredit us or silence us or make us disappear before we can expose whatever conspiracy killed Bradley and framed Mama." She took a deep breath, steadying herself with a kind of courage she'd learned from watching Rose Washington face down crack addicts and gang members and grieving parents who blamed everyone but themselves for their children's problems. "I'm going to upload this recording to the cloud, to every social media platform I can access, to news outlets and legal databases and anywhere else I can think of, because if something happens to me, at least the truth will be out there where they can't suppress it." The sound of footsteps was getting closer, and Sofia could hear one of the men speaking in low tones into his radio. "Target is somewhere near the museum, probably armed with recording equipment. Priority is recovery and neutralization of any evidence before extraction." The clinical professional language made Sofia's blood run cold as she realized these weren't just hired muscle. These were people who'd done this kind of thing before, who spoke about neutralizing evidence and extracting targets like it was just another day at the office. She crouched lower behind the museum wall, her fingers flying across her phone screen as she uploaded the recording file to her Google Drive, her Facebook account, her law firm's secure server, and every other digital platform she could access, creating multiple copies that would be almost impossible to completely erase even if they managed to destroy her phone and kill her in the process. But as Sofia worked to preserve the evidence that could save her mother, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number, and when she answered it out of desperation more than hope, Patricia Hawthorne's panicked voice filled her ear with information that changed everything they thought they knew about the conspiracy that had destroyed their family. "Sofia, thank God you're alive. I managed to get away, but they're not just after us, they're after your brothers too. They've got people watching your house, watching Jamal's apartment, watching Marcus's construction sites, because they know that if even one of you survives with that recording, their entire operation falls apart." Hawthorne's voice was shaking with terror and something that might have been redemption as she continued, "But I have something that might help. I kept copies of all the evidence we suppressed during your mother's trial, all the witness statements we ignored, all the security footage we chose not to present. All the psychological evaluations that proved Bradley was a calculating predator who'd been planning attacks on children for months before he met Rose in that hospital." Sofia's heart leaped with hope even as she heard the footsteps of her pursuers getting closer, even as she realized that this phone call might be her last conversation with anyone who could help save her mother. "Where is it? Where's the evidence?" "Hidden in my office safe, along with documentation of every threat I received, every pressure that was applied to make me prosecute an innocent woman, every name of every person who was involved in this cover-up," Hawthorne replied, her voice growing stronger as she made what was clearly the most important decision of her prosecutorial career. "I'm going to retrieve it all and take it public. I'm going to hold a press conference and admit that I participated in a miscarriage of justice, because I can't live with myself knowing that Rose Washington is rotting in prison for saving children while the real monsters walk free." But before Sofia could respond, before she could ask about the specific names or the nature of the threats or the evidence that might finally exonerate their mother, the sound of running footsteps exploded around the corner of the museum, and suddenly Sofia was face to face with one of the men in expensive suits, a tall, pale figure with cold blue eyes and hands that moved toward her with practiced efficiency. "Miss Chun," the man said, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that suggested he'd done this many times before, "you're going to come with us now, and you're going to give us any recording devices or copies of conversations you might have made, and if you cooperate, your family will be allowed to continue their normal lives while your mother serves her sentence in peace." His smile was cold and professional, the expression of someone who genuinely believed that he was being reasonable by offering Sofia a choice between cooperation and death. "If you don't cooperate, well, accidents happen every day in Detroit, especially to families who don't know when to stop asking questions about things that don't concern them." But Sofia Washington Chun, raised by a woman who'd taught her that sometimes the most important battles are fought when you have everything to lose and nothing left but courage, looked this professional killer in the eye and made the choice that would either save her family or destroy them all. "Go to hell," she said, pressing the final upload button on her phone just as the man lunged forward. And in that moment, as Sofia's recording of Patricia Hawthorne's confession began spreading across the internet like wildfire, the truth about Rose Washington's innocence and the conspiracy that had framed her began reaching millions of people who would soon demand answers that no amount of money or power or threats could suppress. The last thing Sofia saw before everything went black was her phone screen showing "upload complete" and the first few comments from strangers who were already beginning to share her mother's story, already beginning to ask the questions that would ultimately bring down everyone who had participated in the conspiracy to destroy Rose Washington. And as consciousness faded, Sofia smiled knowing that she'd kept the promise she'd made in that basement 3 weeks ago. She'd chosen family, she'd chosen love, and she'd chosen to fight for the woman who'd saved 3 abandoned children and spent her life saving everyone else who needed her. 18 hours after Sofia's recording exploded across social media like a digital wildfire that consumed everything in its path, reaching 12 million views and sparking a nationwide outcry that crashed government websites and flooded news stations with demands for justice. The iron gates of Michigan Women's Correctional Facility swung open on a gray December morning to release Rose Washington into the arms of the 3 children who'd moved heaven and earth to prove her innocence, and as Marcus Sofia, bruised but alive after escaping her captors during the chaos that erupted when federal agents raided the offices of everyone connected to the Bradley cover-up, and Jamal ran toward their mother through a crowd of reporters, protesters, and federal marshals who'd been working through the night to process the evidence that Patricia Hawthorne had delivered in 12 boxes marked "Justice Denied." Rose stood in the doorway wearing the same clothes she'd been sentenced in 4 months earlier, her silver hair now completely white from stress and grief, her 67-year-old frame thinner and more fragile than her children remembered, but her dark brown eyes still burning with the fierce love that had driven her to sacrifice everything to protect the innocent. The first person to reach her was Jamal, who swept his mama into a hug that lifted her feet off the ground despite his own tears streaming down his face like rivers of relief and joy in 25 years of gratitude for the woman who'd found 3 babies in a cardboard box and turned them into a family. And Rose's weathered hands shook as she touched his face, his hair, his shoulders, as if she couldn't quite believe he was real, that they were all real, that she wasn't still dreaming in her concrete cell about the children she thought she'd never hold again. "My babies," she whispered, her voice hoarse from months of crying and praying and wondering if she'd die behind bars without ever seeing them become the magnificent adults they'd grown into. And when Marcus and Sofia crashed into the embrace, creating a circle of arms and tears and laughter that represented everything beautiful and powerful about human love, the crowd of strangers who'd gathered to witness this moment of pure justice began applauding and weeping right along with them, because sometimes the most important victories aren't won in courtrooms or boardrooms, but in the simple act of a family refusing to let evil triumph over good. "I'm so sorry, Mama," Sofia sobbed into her mother's shoulder, her body still aching from her encounter with the men who'd tried to silence her. her mind still reeling from the revelations that had toppled government officials and business leaders and revealed a conspiracy so vast that federal prosecutors were estimating it would take years to fully unravel all the corruption that Thomas Bradley's blackmail schemes had protected. "I'm sorry we couldn't save you faster. I'm sorry you had to suffer in that place, I'm sorry." But Rose was shaking her head, her hands cupping Sofia's face with the same gentle strength that had comforted scraped knees and broken hearts and teenage disappointments for 25 years. "Baby girl, you saved me in every way that matters. You and your brothers proved that love is stronger than lies, that truth is more powerful than corruption, that 3 children who were thrown away like garbage could grow up to move the whole world when someone they loved needed them." Rose's voice grew stronger as she looked at each of her children in turn, seeing not the scared, hungry babies she'd found on her doorstep but the extraordinary adults who'd inherited her courage, her compassion, her unwavering commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. "Marcus, my strong firstborn who taught himself to be the man of the house when he was barely 5 years old, who built a construction company from nothing and used those same hands that learned to comfort babies to build evidence that tore down a conspiracy, you are everything I hoped you'd become and more than I dared to dream." She turned to Sofia, whose legal brilliance and lion-hearted courage had literally rewritten the rules of justice in America, whose recording was already being studied in law schools as an example of how one person's refusal to accept injustice could change the world. "And Sofia, my beautiful daughter who could have used her intelligence for money and fame but chose to use it for love and justice, who risked her own life to save mine, who proved that sometimes the most important cases aren't tried in courtrooms but fought in the hearts of people who refuse to let good people suffer in silence. You have made me prouder than any mother has ever been." Finally, she looked at Jamal, her baby, her shadow, the gentle giant who'd inherited her gift for seeing the best in people and had used that gift to build bridges between her story and the millions of strangers who'd rallied to demand her freedom. "And Jamal, my sweet boy who kept our family's heart beating when mine was breaking, who found Isabella Rodriguez and convinced her to share her story, who reminded the world that heroes don't wear capes but scrubs and work boots and the courage to do what's right even when it costs everything. You are the proof that love can conquer anything, absolutely anything, when it's backed by the kind of unshakable faith that you've shown me every day of your life." As the family held each other in that gray prison parking lot, surrounded by federal agents and reporters and Isabella Rodriguez, who'd driven 3 hours with her grandmother to witness the moment when the angel nurse was finally set free, Detective Rivera approached with tears streaming down his weathered face and a manila envelope in his hands that contained the full confession of Patricia Hawthorne, who'd been granted immunity in exchange for testimony that was dismantling one of the largest corruption scandals in Michigan's history. "Rose," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he handed her the envelope, "there's something else you need to know. The federal investigation triggered by Sofia's recording has led to the arrest of 17 people so far, including 3 state senators, 2 judges, a police chief, and half a dozen businessmen who were being blackmailed by Thomas Bradley for everything from tax evasion to child exploitation to murder." Rivera's voice grew stronger as he delivered the news that would help heal some of the wounds that Bradley's evil had inflicted on the world. "But most importantly, they've identified and arrested 4 other predators who were part of Bradley's network, men who've been hunting children for years while the system looked the other way, and because of your children's courage, because of their refusal to let your sacrifice be in vain, those monsters will never hurt another innocent child." Rose closed her eyes and felt something that had been broken inside her chest begin to heal as she realized that her decision to protect Isabella Rodriguez hadn't just saved one little girl. It had started a chain reaction that was saving countless others, that was exposing a network of evil that had been hiding in plain sight while preying on society's most vulnerable members. "The 3 of you," she said, opening her eyes to look at Marcus, Sofia, and Jamal with wonder and gratitude and a love so pure it seemed to light up the gray December morning, "didn't just save your mama. You saved children you'll never meet, families you'll never know, futures that would have been stolen by monsters who thought they were untouchable." She pulled them close again, breathing in the scent of their hair, feeling their heartbeats against her chest, marveling at the miracle of being alive and free and surrounded by the greatest love she'd ever known. 25 years ago, I found 3 babies in a cardboard box, and I thought I was saving you, but now I understand that God put you in my life because He knew that someday you'd be the ones to save me, to save all the other children who needed someone to fight for them, To prove that family isn't just about blood or biology, but about the choice to love completely, to sacrifice everything, to never give up on each other, no matter how dark the world gets. As they walked together toward Marcus's pickup truck, past reporters shouting questions and federal agents coordinating arrests and Isabella Rodriguez waving from her grandmother's arms, the four members of the Washington family looked exactly like what they were, living proof that love really can conquer all, that justice delayed is not always justice denied, that sometimes the most important battles are won not by armies or politicians or powerful institutions, but by ordinary people who love each other enough to risk everything, absolutely everything, to keep their family whole.